Love was the last thing either of them expected to find in that valley. The mall was over my head when I saw it, and I damn near brought it down on my own boot. A light far end of the valley where there'd never been one. 8 years I'd split wood at that same block at the end of a day, and 8 years there'd been nothing across that black but more black, the line of the far ridge if there was a moon, and on a hard night not even that. Now there was a little yellow square of it, low and steady, lamplight through a window. I stood there with the mall up like a fool, the round going cold on the block, and watched it the way you watch a fire you're not sure is out. I'll tell it the way it comes to me, which is not the way it happened, because that's not how a man keeps a thing. You keep the light and the cold and the smell of her wet wool, and the rest you have to go fetch. So bear with me if I double back. I've had nobody to tell it to in a long while, and I find I don't want to hurry. My name's Eli. The valley doesn't have a name worth saying. There was a name on a map once, French, somebody's idea, but nobody up there used it. It was a long green cut between two ridges, a creek down the middle of it cold enough to ache your teeth in July, aspen on the north slope, dark timber on the south, and grass in the bottoms that would put fat on a cow if the cow lived to graze it. High country. Snow 7 months if it felt mean. I'd come up there to be done. I won't make a long thing of why. I had a wife named Sarah, and a place down in the flats, and 2 winters into it, she took a fever, and I dug a hole in ground I had to thaw with a fire first. And after that the flats had nothing in them I wanted to look at. I sold the place for less than it was worth to a man who knew I'd sell for less than it was worth, and I took the money and a string of horses, and what cattle I could trail, and I went up. People down in the town said I'd gone to die up there alone like an old dog. They weren't far wrong about my plan. A man doesn't always know the difference between meaning to die and meaning to be left alone, and I'd have told you they were the same thing. 8 years. I built a house with my hands, low and tight against the wind, sod and log, a stovepipe I had to clean with a rag on a stick. I ran maybe 40 head and a few horses I cared about more than the cattle. Once a season I'd take a wagon down the long grade to the town for coffee and flour and powder and nails, and whatever I couldn't make or do without, and I'd say maybe 20 words the whole trip and feel them like a stone in the boot. Then back up to the quiet. I had it the way I wanted it. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't a sad man up there, I was a stopped one. There's a difference, and I didn't know it yet. So you understand what that light was. It wasn't a neighbor. There hadn't been a neighbor in 8 years. The far end of the valley was a parcel nobody with sense would take, a long apron of land that the creek went through fast and useless, rocky where it wasn't boggy, the timber too far off the good grass, and the wind funneled down on it from the pass so a body couldn't keep a hat. A man named Prout had filed on it once, the year before I came, and starved off it in 11 months, and after him the land sat. I'd gone over it once or twice early on, looking it over the way you do, and decided whoever filed on that next would be a fool or a man with no money, which up there came to about the same thing. The light burned till after I'd banked my own fire and lay down. I got up twice to look at it through the little window, told myself it was a fire on the slope, somebody's camp, hunters maybe, gone by morning. It was there in the morning. A wagon I could just make it out, and a canvas rigged off it, and a thread of smoke standing straight up in the cold. I didn't go over, I want that understood too. It wasn't my way to go over. A man came up to that country to be let be, and the courtesy you paid was to let the next man be the same. So I watched it the way you'd watch weather. I rode my line and pulled a cow out of a bog hole and shod the gray and watched the far end of the valley take a shape. The wagon, then the canvas down and logs going up, slow, crooked at first and then less crooked, a corral of sorts, a stovepipe finally poking out of a roof that wasn't much of a roof. Somebody over there was building. Building it wrong was my first clear thought. The chimney was on the wind side. The corral gate opened the way the snow would drift it shut. Whoever it was had set the house too low and would have water under the floor come the thaw. I caught myself thinking these things and got irritated at myself for thinking them. It wasn't my fence and it wasn't my floor. It was the better part of a month before I saw her, and even then it was from a distance across the creek, and I took her for a boy. Slight in a man's coat too big, a man's hat jammed down, swinging an axe at a deadfall with a steadiness that told me whoever it was had swung an axe before. I sat the gray and watched a minute. The blows came even no wasted lick, the kind of stroke a person learns over years, not one they put on for somebody watching. Then the figure straightened and pushed the hat back, and a rope of pale hair came loose, and I saw it was a woman, and I turned the gray around and rode back the way I'd come like I'd seen something I wasn't meant to. A woman alone. On the worst piece of ground in the valley, going into a winter that would test a man with money and help, and she had neither that I could see. I told myself it was none of my business in about 4 different ways riding home, and not one of them took. I met her over a cow. It was September, the aspen already turning at the top of the slope, the mornings hard enough to skim the trough. One of my heifers had gotten through a place where the creek had cut the bank away, and a few wires were down, and she'd wandered the length of the valley and gotten herself into the bog on the bad parcel, the very ground I'd pulled my own cow from, except this was deeper, and the heifer was into her belly and blowing. I rode up on it, and there was the woman in the muck to her knees with a rope around the heifer's horns and dallied to a post she'd driven, hauling on it with everything she had and getting nowhere but redder in the face. She didn't hear me till I was close. When she turned, she didn't startle, and she didn't go soft with relief the way you might expect. She looked at me, and then she looked at the brand on the heifer, and then back at me, and she said, "Yours." Not a question, an accusation near enough. "Mine," I said. "Fence came down, I'll see to it." "You will see to it," she said. The words came careful and a little flat, the way they do for somebody who learned them off a page and from listening hard, and underneath them was the old country, the up and down of it. "She has been 3 hours. I cannot pull her alone." I got down. I want to tell you how she was because it mattered later what I saw in those few minutes. She didn't let go of the rope to greet me. She didn't ask me what to do. When I went to the heifer's head, she read what I meant before I said it, and shifted her haul to keep the tension while I dug at the suck of the mud around the forelegs with my hands. And when I called for it, she gave slack. And when I called for it, she took it up, and she had the sense to brace with her whole back and not just her arms. We got that heifer out between us, the 2 of us black to the elbows and the cow up at last, and standing there trembling and stupid. And the woman stood up straight and pushed the wet hair off her face with the back of a filthy hand and looked at me, breathing hard, and I'll be honest, what was in my chest was not the heifer. "My thanks," I said. "I'll mend the fence, she won't trouble you again." "The fence," she said. "Yes." And then, looking at the place where the creek had cut the bank, where any fool could see it would cut more, "You set the wire too near the water." I knew I had. I'd known it for a year and let it go because it was the far corner and nothing was over there to wander into. Now there was. "I'll move it back," I said. She nodded like a woman closing an account. Then, and this is the part I kept, she reached down into the muck and came up with a horseshoe, an old one, cast and lost their God knew when by God knew whose horse, rusted to lace, and she turned it over in her hand and looked at it and put it in her coat pocket. Not because it was worth anything, because it was iron and she was a person who did not throw away iron. I didn't have a word for what that told me about her then. I have one now. It told me she meant to stay. "I'm Eli," I said, "place at the head of the valley." "I have seen your smoke," she said. "Merritt." She didn't give me a hand to shake, both of ours were past it. She gave me a short nod that did the work of one. I drove the heifer home the long way and mended the fence the next morning and moved the wire back from the water like she'd said, and that was the whole of it, I told myself. A neighbor I hadn't asked for and a fence I'd let go too long. I didn't go back over. But that night I caught myself at the window again, looking for the light, and there it was, low and yellow and steady, and I stood there longer than the looking needed. Here is a thing I learned slow, over that fall, mostly from a distance, the way you learn anything about a person you're too stubborn to go and ask. She'd come over the water from Norway with a husband, Anders. I had the name later from her, said plain and without any weight on it, which is how you know a name has had all the weight wrung out of it by being carried a long way. They'd meant to go to Minnesota where there were others of their kind, and somewhere on the way west the plan came apart. I never had it all, and I didn't dig. And Anders had died of it, of the way west, the way so many did, not of any one thing you could name, but of the whole hard length of it. And she had buried him and found herself with a little money and no people and a country she could barely speak. And she'd taken the parcel because it was cheap and it was hers, and going back was nothing. A woman alone on the worst ground in a high valley, who couldn't say 100 words of the language, who set her chimney on the wrong side because nobody had ever told her which side the wind came from. And she was making it work. That was the thing that got under my skin and stayed there like a splinter you can feel but can't find. She had no business making it work, and she was. She got hay up, bad hay, late hay, but hay. She got a cow and then 2. She traded down in the town. I heard later, hard as flint, and Harmon at the store respected her for it and disliked it, which is the same thing in a man like Harmon. She dug a root cellar by hand. She shot a deer in October. I heard the shot roll up the valley, one shot, and saw the smoke of her smoking fire for 3 days after and thought, one shot. She doesn't waste powder. There was nothing soft about how she lived, and I came to look across that valley in the evening and find the light and think, without quite letting myself say it, that the valley was less empty than it had been. I helped where I could without making it help. That's a particular skill, and I'll own to it. A man who's been alone learns to give a thing in a way that doesn't ask to be thanked, because being thanked is its own kind of debt. I left a quarter of an elk hung on her gate post in November with snow coming and didn't knock. I found her gate drifting shut the way I'd known it would and went down one morning early and rehung it to swing the other way and was gone before her smoke was up. I didn't sign these things. I figured she knew. You can't hide much across a valley that quiet. She paid them back the same way, which is how I knew we understood each other. A loaf of dark bread on my own gate post, heavy as a stone and better than anything I'd put in my mouth in 8 years. A pair of mittens, knit gray, left folded on my woodpile, that fit me like she'd measured my hand while I slept, and they were the warmest thing I owned for years after, and I've still got one of them. We were neighbors the way two hard old trees are neighbors, leaning a little toward the same light and not saying a word about it. I'll tell you the first time we talked past business. It was the edge of December. I'd ridden the line and come up on her splitting wood, always splitting wood, that woman, like she was trying to get ahead of a winter you could not get ahead of, and I stopped, and instead of touching my hat and moving on, I got down. I don't know why. Maybe the cold. Maybe 8 years is just long enough. You're set low, I said, nodding at her house. Water'll be under your floor at the thaw. She set the axe down and looked at me, and I thought she'd take it ill, a man riding up to tell her what was wrong with her place. Instead, she said, I know it. I knew it when I built. There was no time to do it right and live. So I built to live, and the floor I will fight in the spring. She said it plain, no apology in it. Then she almost smiled, just at the corner. You have ridden 3 years past your fence to tell me a thing I know. 8, I said. 8, she said. Long time to look across at an empty valley. Wasn't empty, I said, just quiet. And now there's somebody building her chimney on the wrong side, I said. And that did it. She laughed, short and surprised. A laugh that I don't think had been out of her in a while either. And the sound of it went up the valley and came back off the far ridge, and I stood there in the cold like a man who'd struck a match in a dark room and was looking at his own house for the first time. I split wood with her that afternoon, didn't ask. Just took the maul when she stopped to drink and went to work, and she let me, which from her was a thing. We didn't talk much. There isn't much to say over splitting wood, and that's why it's a good thing to do with somebody, the work says it. When I left, the light came on behind me as I rode, and I didn't have to turn around to know it. I have to tell about the winter now, because the winter is where it was decided, though neither of us decided it so much as lived through it and came out the other side knowing. It came down on us the second week of January, and it did not let up. I'd seen hard winters up there. This was the one the old hands down in the town still meant when they said the bad winter. Years after, the one that killed stock in the lower country by the thousand, and froze the freight road shut for 9 weeks, and took 3 men I knew of who went out to feed and didn't make it back to their own doors 50 yards off. Snow to the eaves. Then a thaw that put a glaze of ice over all of it. Then more snow on the ice, and a wind that came down off the pass and through the valley like the valley was a barrel, and somebody was blowing across the top of it. I knew my own ground, and I worked it. I'd put up hay like a man expecting to be punished for laziness, because that's the only way I know how to be, and I had my few horses in close and the cattle on the leeward bottoms, and I fought to keep them alive day by day, breaking ice on the creek with an axe, hauling hay on a sledge because no wagon would move, coming in at dark too tired to eat and getting up in the black to do it again. And every night through the storm, when there was a lead in it long enough to see, I looked for the light. It was there, lower some nights the wind taking it, but there, and I'd think she's making it and I'd sleep. Then one night it wasn't there. I told myself snow on the glass, told myself she'd banked early and gone to bed, tired the way I was tired. Told myself a dozen things and looked out the window a dozen times into the blowing dark, and there was no light at the far end of the valley, just the black it had been for 8 years before her. And I lay there, and the black looked wrong now in a way it never had when it was only black. Second night, no light. I didn't decide to go. I want to be plain about that because afterward people made it into a brave thing and it wasn't brave. It was just the only thing a man could do and keep being a man. I got up in the dark of the second night. No, it was past midnight. Into the third day, the wind had eased some, and the cold had come down hard behind it the way it does. Cold that cracks the trees with a sound like a rifle. I put on everything I owned, and the gray mitten and its mate, and I saddled the gray because he was sure-footed and would go where I pointed him, and I went out into it. It's the better part of 3 miles down that valley, and it took me near 4 hours. I won't lay it all out. The snow was belly-deep on the gray and the drifts and crusted hard between, and the crust would hold him and then break, and he'd go down to his chest and lunge, and I'd be off and floundering and get back up. The cold got into me past the clothes. There's a point in cold like that where you stop hurting and start feeling warm and easy, and I knew that point for what it was and made myself keep being miserable, because misery up there is the same as alive. I lost the way twice in the blowing and found it by the creek, by the sound of the water still moving under the ice, and followed the sound. I thought about Sarah, oddly, and about the hole I'd thawed with a fire, and I found I did not want to thaw another hole, and that was about the only thought I had room for by the end. There was no light because there was no fire. That's what I found. The door wasn't barred, and I shouldered through a drift to get it open, and inside it was near as cold as out and dark. And I stood there with the wind howling at my back and could not for a second make myself say anything. And then I did. I said her name, Merritt. And from the dark corner where the bed was there came a sound, not a word, just a sound, low and broke. And I knew she was alive, and my knees went on me for just a second, against the door frame. She'd let the fire die because she couldn't get up to feed it. A cow had got cast in a drift 2 days before, and she'd gone out to it and come back wet, and the wet had turned to a fever in her chest, the kind that drowns a person slow. And she'd lain there 2 days getting weaker, too weak to reach the wood, watching her own fire go down to coals and then to nothing, and she had not lit a lamp because she could not get up to do it, and that was why the light had gone out. She'd lain there in the dark 2 days waiting to die, and the worst of it, the part I can't tell without stopping, is that when I came through the door her first words, when she got them out, cracked and barely there, were, "You should not have come, in this. You could die for an old cow's fence." Even then. Even down to almost nothing, the first thing in her was that I'd put myself at risk, and the second thing was a joke about the heifer. There are not many people made like that. I have known two. She was one. I built the fire up till the stovepipe glowed, and I melted snow and got broth into her a spoon at a time, and I did not sleep for I think 2 days. I'm not going to make a fine thing of the nursing. I've nursed cattle and horses and one wife, and you do what the body needs and you don't think past the next hour. I kept her warm, and I kept her fed, and I kept her own cow alive too. Broke a path out to it through the drift and got it up and fed, because I knew when she was clear enough to ask. The cow would be the first thing she asked about, and it was. Third morning, fever still in her but her eyes clearer, the first full thing she said was, "The brindle cow." Not how am I not thank you. The brindle cow. And I said it was fed and standing, and she closed her eyes, and a little of the tightness went out of her face, and I sat there by the stove and looked at her and felt something come up in me that I'd put down a long time ago and never expected to lift again. The fever broke on the 5th day. I knew because I woke from a doze by the stove. I'd been sleeping sitting up against the wall like an old dog after all, and she was looking at me. Just looking, steady, the wild gone out of her eyes and her own self back in them. "You're still here," she said. "Storm's not done," I said, which was true and was also not why. She lay there a while, breathing easier than she had, and watched me feed the stove. Then she said, careful the way she said the important things, fitting the words on like she was choosing which to spend, "Down in the town, there is a man, Harmon." I knew Harmon. Store, freight, money, a widower with a good house and bad eyes that went over a person like he was pricing them. "He has asked me," she said, "to come and keep his house, to be his wife, a warm house, a full larder, no more of this." She moved her hand a little, meaning the whole hard fight of the place, the chimney on the wrong side, the floor she'd have to battle at the thaw, the winter that had near killed her. "He is not a cruel man. He would not beat me. I would not be cold again." I kept feeding the stove. I didn't trust my face. I said, "That's a sound offer for a hard country." "Yes," she said, "it is sound." And then she was quiet a long time, long enough that I thought she'd drifted off, and I went on with the small work, and when she spoke again her voice had changed. There was something under it, a thing she'd been turning over a long time, maybe the whole 2 days in the dark. "When I lay here," she said, "before you came, I thought this is how it ends, alone in the cold like Anders, and no one will know for the snow. And I was not afraid of the dying, I want you to understand. I have been near it before. I was afraid of—" She stopped, and her hand moved on the blanket, and she made herself go on. "I was afraid no one would have wanted to come. That there was no one in the world for whom my light going out would be a thing they would ride into the dark for. That is what I was afraid of, not the cold. I had to look at the stove for that. And then," she said, "the door, and it was you, who I have spoken to maybe 10 times, who hangs an elk on my gate and rides away so I cannot thank you, who told me my chimney was on the wrong side." A breath. "You came 3 miles in that, an old man, for a woman who is nothing to you, who has a cow your fence led into a bog. Harmon would not have come. Harmon would have said, in the spring we will see what the snow gives up. You came in the night." "Anybody would have," I started. "No," she said, and there was the flint in it, the old hard true thing in her. "Do not do that. Do not make it small. I have lived among men, most would not have come, you came so." And she looked at me, and I made myself look back, and she said it plain as she'd told me my wire was too near the water. "Harmon offers me a warm house. You rode into the dark. I know the difference between these things. I am too old and have buried too much to take the warm house and call it the larger thing. I will not." I didn't say anything. I couldn't have told you my own name right then. "I am not asking you for anything," she said, gentler now, seeing my face. "You came up here to be alone. I came up here to be alone. We are two people who decided to be done." She almost smiled, that corner of her mouth. "But I find I am not so done as I thought, and I think, Eli, neither are you. A done man does not look across a valley for a light every night. I have seen you at your woodpile in the evening. You think the dark hides you. It does not." And she put out her hand, not for me to take her, for me to hold. There's a difference, and a woman like that knew it. Her hand was thin from the fever and rough from the work, and there was a callus across the palm from the axe, and I took it in both of mine, the gray mittens long since off, my bare hands, and I held it, and she held back, and neither of us said the word for it because the word would have been too small, and we were both too old to spend a word that didn't fit. The stove ticked. The wind had finally laid down outside. And there it was, the thing I'd come up that valley 8 years ago believing I'd left in a thawed grave in the flats, sitting in my 2 hands, light as a bird and strong as a fence wire. Freely given, asked for by nobody, owed to nobody, just there because she'd chosen to put it there. A man waits a long time to be chosen like that. To be looked at clear, all of him, the stubbornness and the years and the wrong side of the valley solitude, and chosen anyway over the warm house, over the easy thing, by a woman who could have had the easy thing and looked at it and looked at him and picked him. I'd thought that was finished for me. I'd have bet the whole place it was finished. It wasn't finished. It had only been waiting for somebody to ride into the dark for, and somebody to ride into the dark too. We were married in the spring, down in the town, by a circuit preacher who came through. And Harmon stood at the back of the room and shook my hand after with a grip that meant he knew he'd lost a thing money couldn't buy and didn't understand how. And I didn't explain it to him, because you can't. She fought the water under her floor and won, the way she said she would with my help, which she let me give now without the dance of it. We moved her stock up to my place where the grass was good and let the bad parcel go back to the elk. I built the chimney on the right side of the addition, and she let me know every cold morning after that the new side was warmer, which was her way of saying a thing she'd never say straight. I'm an old man now, older than I was, telling this to a stove and whoever's listening past it. The valley's the same. The creek still aches your teeth. Merritt's hair went from pale to white, and she's slower at the wood than she was, and so am I, and we split it together still, the work saying what we don't. But here's the end of it, the picture I keep, the one I'd give you if I could give you only one. It's an evening in the fall, the aspen gold up the slope, the first cold coming on. I'm at the woodpile, the maul in my hand, the way I was the night this all started. And I look up out of habit toward the far end of the valley, toward where her light used to be, and there's nothing there now, just the black and the ridge, because the light's not down there anymore. It's behind me. It's in my own window where she is, moving around inside it, the lamp lit, the smoke going up straight in the cold. I don't have to ride 3 miles into the dark for it. I just have to set down the maul and turn around and walk to it, and it'll be warm, and she'll look up when the door opens, and she'll have known my step before the latch. I set the maul down, I turn around, I walk to the light.